Have you ever heard a knock at your door in the middle of the night? A slow, deliberate knock that doesn't belong to a friend, a neighbor, or a passing stranger. You tell yourself it's nothing, a prank, maybe. The wind, a tree branch scraping against the wood. But deep down, something tells you the truth. You are not alone. My name is Daniel Rivers, and I need you to listen carefully. I don't have much time. There's something I need you to understand. Never answer the knock at 3 a.m. I wish I had known that before. Before the night everything changed. Before I opened that door and let something in. It started when I moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of town. The kind of place you settle into when you're trying to disappear. I wasn't running from the law or anything dramatic. Just life. A bad breakup. A dead-end job. I needed a fresh start, and the house on Pine Hollow Road seemed like the perfect place for it. Cheap, quiet, and isolated. The house was old, but it had character. A wraparound porch. Sturdy wooden floors that creaked in all the right ways. A big oak tree in the backyard that cast long, twisting shadows at sunset. The real estate agent had warned me that the previous tenant left in a hurry, but I didn't ask questions. People moved all the time. The first few nights were uneventful. I unpacked, got into a routine, and started adjusting to the quiet. Maybe too quiet. No street lights, no traffic. Just the sound of crickets and the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. It wasn't until the fourth night that I heard it. I had fallen asleep on the couch, half-empty beer bottle on the coffee table, an old horror movie playing in the background. A sudden thump jolted me awake. First, I thought it was part of the movie, but then I heard it again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I sat up, my heart thudding in my chest. Thump, thump, thump. I glanced at my phone. 3 a.m. I shook off the unease and walked to the door. Maybe it was a lost traveler, a drunk neighbor, or some kids messing around. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty. A chill crept up my spine. I turned the porch light on, unlocked the door, and cracked it open just a bit. Cold night air rushed inside. Hello! Silence. I stepped onto the porch, scanning the yard. The oak tree loomed in the darkness, its branches shifting in the wind. A coyote howled somewhere far away, but there was no sign of anyone. No footprints on the porch. No retreating footsteps in the grass. I shut the door, double-locked it, and told myself it was just the house settling. That's what old houses do, right? They creak, they groan. Sometimes they even sound like they're knocking. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I ran into my neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Calloway. She lived alone in a small house down the road. Friendly, in a quiet, cautious way. "You look like hell," she said, peering at me over her garden fence. "Didn't sleep well," I admitted. "Thought I heard someone knocking at my door last night." Her expression changed. She lowered her gardening shears. "What time?" 3 in the morning. Her knuckles whitened around the shears. "You didn't answer, did you?" I hesitated. "No." I looked, but no one was there. She let out a breath, nodding. "Good. Don't ever answer." Something in her tone made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Why?" She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned in slightly. "That house. You know why it was so cheap?" I shook my head. The last tenant left without a word. Didn't even pack his things. Just up and disappeared. Before that, same story. Different people, same ending. I forced a laugh. "You're saying my house is haunted?" She didn't laugh. I'm saying you should keep your door locked at night, and if you hear that knock again, no matter what you do, don't open the door. I wanted to write her off as a superstitious old woman, but the way she looked at me, the fear in her eyes, made it hard to shake off. That night, I went to bed earlier, determined to get some sleep, but at some point I found myself dreaming, or at least I think it was a dream. I was standing in my living room. The TV was off. The only light came from the dim glow of the moon filtering through the curtains. Then I heard it. 3 knocks. I turned toward the door, but this time, something felt wrong. The air felt heavy, thick. My feet wouldn't move. I wanted to run, to hide, but all I could do was stand there as the knocking grew louder. Thump, thump, thump. Then the door handle started to turn. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. My room was dark, but I could hear something, soft, distant, but unmistakable. Knocking. I sat up, gripping the blanket. My phone screen glowed beside me. 3 a.m. The knocks came again. Slow, methodical. I stayed frozen in bed, my breath shallow. Then silence. I forced myself to get up and check the house. The front door was still locked. The porch was empty. No sign that anyone had been there. But when I turned back toward my bedroom, something stopped me cold. The hallway mirror, just past the bedroom door, was fogged over, as if someone had breathed on it. And in the center, drawn in the condensation, a single handprint. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and that was only the beginning. Sleep didn't come easy after that night. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, a trick of the mind, that maybe, just maybe, the handprint was my own, left over from when I last cleaned the mirror. But deep down, I knew better. Something had knocked. Something had left its mark, and it wasn't finished with me yet. The next night, I stayed awake. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I kept my phone close, my eyes on the door. I left every light on in the house. But at exactly 3 a.m., the knocking returned. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I gripped my phone, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there waiting, listening. Thump, 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 then silence. Minutes passed. I exhaled slowly, feeling my body relax just enough to move again. Maybe it was over. Maybe. Thump, thump, thump. Louder this time. I squeezed my eyes shut. I wanted to ignore it, but then my phone vibrated in my hand. A single message from an unknown number. Why won't you answer? I dropped the phone. My pulse pounded in my ears. I hadn't given my number to anyone in this town. I hadn't even told my friends where I had moved yet. The knocks came again. I stood up on shaky legs, forcing myself toward the door. Just like the night before, I peered through the peephole. And just like before, nothing. The porch was empty. No footprints in the dirt. No signs of movement. I checked my phone again. Another message. Look outside. I swallowed hard. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. Every instinct told me not to listen, but against every ounce of better judgment, I unlocked my phone, opened the security camera app, and checked the live feed. First, I saw nothing. The empty porch, the wind swaying the branches of the oak tree, the glow of the street lamp in the distance, and then movement. A shadow shifted at the edge of the camera's view, just past my front porch, beyond the reach of the light. It was standing just outside the frame, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went straight to Mrs. Calloway's house. She was out in her yard, clipping roses, her face calm. Too calm. "You heard it again, didn't you?" she asked without looking up. I hesitated before nodding. She sighed, setting her shears down. "I told you, you don't answer. No matter what." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "What happens if I do?" Her expression darkened. "Nobody knows. The ones who answer, they don't talk about it. They don't get the chance." A chill ran down my spine. I told her about the messages, about the shadow on the camera. She listened without interrupting, nodding slowly. Then she disappeared into her house and returned a few minutes later, pressing a folded note into my hand. "This belonged to the last tenant," she said softly. "I found it after he left." I opened the note. The paper was old, edges curled, ink faded, but the words sent a shiver down my spine. "It's not knocking to be let in. It's knocking to see if you're listening." My hands trembled as I lowered the note. Mrs. Calloway's voice was quiet. "You need to leave, Daniel, before it gets worse." I wanted to believe she was crazy, that she was just an old woman telling ghost stories. But the fear in her voice told me otherwise. That night, I locked every door, every window. I pulled the curtains shut. I even pushed a chair against the front door like that would somehow help. At 3 a.m., I sat in my bedroom, gripping my phone, waiting. Then, the knocking started. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. But this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from inside the house. I froze. My skin went ice cold. Thump, thump, thump. It was just outside my bedroom door. I stared at the door handle, heart hammering so loud I could barely hear my own breath. Then, something whispered my name, right on the other side of the door. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and opened the security camera app. The front porch was empty, but my bedroom camera, my blood ran cold. There was someone standing in the corner of my room, tall, still, featureless, just standing there, watching. The screen flickered, the camera feed cut out. Then the whisper came again, right next to my ear. I don't remember how I got through the night. I must have blacked out at some point. When I woke up, the room was empty. The door was still locked, but something had changed. The air felt different, heavier, like the house wasn't mine anymore. I checked the security footage from the night before, hoping, praying that I had imagined it. But the footage, it was gone, corrupted. The only thing left was a single frame. It was my bedroom, and in the center of the image, the door, wide open. Somewhere deep down, I had convinced myself that as long as I followed the rule, don't answer, I would be safe. That whatever was knocking, whatever had crept inside my house, couldn't actually hurt me unless I let it. I was wrong, because rules only work when both sides follow them. And on the 5th night, something changed. I barely left the house anymore. I wasn't sleeping. Every shadow looked like it was hiding something. Every sound made me jump. I started keeping my phone camera open, using it like a second pair of eyes. Because sometimes, if I stared into the dark long enough, I swore I could see it, standing just outside my vision, waiting. I tried calling the landlord, thinking maybe I could break the lease. No answer. I tried looking up the last tenant, but there was no record of him. Not even a forwarding address. Then, at 2:57 a.m., I heard something new. Not a knock. Something scraping against the walls. Long, slow drags, as if something was testing the house. I clutched my phone, forcing myself to look at the security cameras. My hands were shaking. Front porch, empty. Living room, empty. Hallway. I stopped breathing. Something was moving just outside my bedroom door. Not standing this time, crawling. His body was wrong. Too long, too thin. Hands pressing against the floor as it pulled itself forward. The scraping sound grew louder. Then, it stopped. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. The figure froze just inches from my bedroom door. And then, as if it knew I was watching, it looked up at the camera. Not at the door. Not at the house. At me. The screen glitched. The camera cut out. And then the knocking started. The knocking came from inside my room. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The closet door, it was open, just an inch, and something was breathing inside. I didn't move, couldn't. The knocking came again, not from the closet, from under the bed. Thump, thump, thump. The air turned heavy. My vision blurred. I felt lightheaded, like something was pressing down on my chest. Then, a voice, so quiet, so close. Let me in. I ran. I don't even remember unlocking the front door. I just remember running, out of the house, down the road. I didn't stop until I reached Mrs. Calloway's porch. I banged on her door, gasping for breath. Lights flicked on inside. She pulled the door open, staring at me in shock. You opened it. I didn't answer. Couldn't. I just stood there, shaking. She sighed and stepped aside. Come inside. Quickly. Mrs. Calloway made me tea. I could barely hold the cup. My hands were shaking so badly. She sat across from me, watching, waiting. Finally, she spoke. It knows you now. I swallowed hard. What does... She hesitated. Then, I don't know. But it's older than this town. Older than this place. And it wants something. I gripped the cup tighter. Why does it knock? She sighed. To see if you're listening. I frowned. I had seen that phrase before. On the note, Mrs. Calloway continued. Most people ignore it. Some people move away before it gets bad. But a few, she trailed off. The last tenant, I whispered. She nodded. He didn't just leave, Daniel. He vanished. No one ever saw him go. One day he was just gone. And the house was empty. I felt sick. I set the cup down and wiped my face with my hands. How do I stop it? Mrs. Calloway didn't answer right away. She stared at me for a long time. Then she leaned in and whispered, You don't... I stayed at Mrs. Calloway's that night. I didn't sleep. I kept expecting to hear the knocking at her door, but it never came. For the first time in days, the house was silent. By morning, I made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed what little I had into my car. Mrs. Calloway watched from her porch, sadness in her eyes. You won't be the last, she said softly. I nodded, forcing a smile I didn't feel. But I won't be here. I pulled out of the driveway and didn't look back. For the first few days I felt free. The further I got from that house, the lighter I felt. No more shadows at the edge of my vision. No more knocking. But on the fourth night in my new apartment, I woke up. Something felt wrong. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. Why won't you answer? My stomach dropped. I turned toward the bedroom door. And then, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Thump, thump, thump. It had followed me. I left the house. I thought it was over. But I was wrong. The knocking followed me. And now I knew the truth. There was nowhere left to run. I sat frozen in bed, my phone clutched in my shaking hand. Thump, thump, thump. The knocks came again. 3 slow, deliberate sounds exactly like before. But this wasn't the old house. had moved hundreds of miles away. I forced myself to breathe, my pulse hammering in my ears. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe someone was just messing with me. I grabbed my phone and checked the peephole. Nothing. I stared for a long moment, barely blinking. The hallway was empty. I exhaled slowly, stepping back from the door. My phone vibrated again. Another message. I found you. My body went cold. I turned, scanning my new apartment. I had barely unpacked. The boxes were still stacked against the walls. The place should have felt unfamiliar, but it didn't. It felt like it was watching me. I checked every window, every closet. Nothing was out of place, but the air, it felt wrong. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chest, phone in my hand. I stared at the door, and I waited. The next night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, watching, waiting. At 3 a.m., the knocking returned. But this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from inside the walls, soft at first, a rhythmic tapping like something trying to find a way in. Then, a whisper, right by my ear, spoke my name. I bolted upright, heart pounding. The room was empty. The door was still locked, but the whisper had been real. I grabbed my phone and checked the security cameras. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to put the phone down, movement. The hallway camera flickered. A dark figure, standing just outside my apartment door. Not knocking, just waiting. I watched, paralyzed, as it began to move. Slowly, deliberately, pressing its hands against the door, testing it. The screen glitched. The camera cut out. And then, bang. Something slammed against the door so hard the entire apartment shook. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, my phone. I didn't care about my things. I was getting out. I drove without a destination. I didn't stop. I didn't think. I just needed distance. I checked into a motel 3 towns over. The kind of place that smelled like cigarette smoke and cheap soap. I didn't care. I locked the door, blocked it with the dresser, turned on every light. I kept my phone in my hand, watching the clock. 2:59 a.m. I held my breath. 3 a.m. Silence. No knocks. No whispers. Maybe I had finally left it behind. I exhaled. Then, a text. Look outside. My stomach clenched. I forced myself to my feet, my legs weak beneath me. Slowly, I walked to the motel window, and then I saw it, standing by my car, waiting. I couldn't see its face, just the outline of something tall. Still, watching. It had followed me. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short gasps. I wasn't safe. I was never safe. Morning came. The figure was gone. I checked out of the motel, but I didn't know where to go. The knocking, the whispers, it didn't matter where I went. I thought about calling someone. The police. A friend. But what would I say? That something was following me? That a presence I couldn't see was knocking at my door every night? They would never believe me. No one ever did. So I drove. I didn't know where. I just knew I couldn't stop. But as I reached the highway, my phone vibrated again. Another message. I hesitated before looking. You can't run forever. My breath hitched. I looked up, and there, standing on the side of the road, a figure, tall, still, facing my car as I drove past, waiting, watching. And in that moment, I realized something. The knocking wasn't asking to come in. It was letting me know it was already here. You can't run forever. I thought I could. I thought that if I just kept moving, kept leaving every place behind, I could outrun whatever was following me. But I was wrong. It wasn't after my body. It wasn't after my life. It was after something deeper, something much harder to escape. And now it was time to face the truth. I couldn't outrun it any longer. I'd been driving for days all over the state, but the whole time, every minute, I could feel it, watching, waiting. Wherever I went, the presence was just there. I couldn't escape the feeling. It was as if it had claimed me. I came to a stop at the outskirts of a town I didn't recognize. A little place small enough to feel like the kind of town that had been forgotten by time. It was the only place I hadn't yet visited. Maybe this time things would be different, but deep down I knew the truth. It wasn't the place that needed to change. It was me. I parked my car in a gas station parking lot and stepped out into the cool night. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another text. "I'm waiting. Come home." I froze. It knew where I was. It always knew. The house. I didn't realize it at first, but as soon as I saw the familiar road signs, I knew. I knew where I was. I hadn't meant to come back here, but somehow my car had taken me back to the town where it all began, where the knocking first started. The house, the place that had been empty before, where the old tenant had vanished. It was waiting for me. I turned my phone off, staring at the house in front of me. It was just like I remembered. The same broken windows, the same dark silhouette against the night sky, the same silent presence hanging in the air. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to go back. But I knew I had no choice. I had to end it. I stood in front of the house, my heart racing. I could hear the wind rustling through the trees. But there was something else too, a faint sound. It was the knock. Thump, thump, thump. 3 knocks. The rule. I had broken it once before. But now, this time I had to face it. My hand trembled as I reached for the door. The knob turned easily beneath my grip, and I pushed it open. And there, inside, in the dim glow of the moonlight, I saw it. The figure, the one that had been following me, was standing in the doorway. It wasn't tall anymore. It wasn't thin like before. It had changed. It was me. The figure was a reflection of myself, only darker, older, and twisted. It looked at me with those empty eyes I couldn't look away from. And then it spoke. "You've finally come home." I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet were frozen in place. I couldn't move. It was me, but it wasn't. I could feel the darkness in its gaze, like it was calling to something inside me that I couldn't control. I stepped forward, and the room seemed to grow colder. "Let me in." The knocking wasn't just a warning. It wasn't just an invitation to open the door. It was a trap. It had been drawing me back here over and over, testing my resolve. And now, standing in front of this twisted version of myself, I realized the truth. The knocking had never been about opening the door. It was about what happens when you do. Every time I answered, I invited it in. And every time I ran, I was just running in circles, pushing the darkness deeper inside me. I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't escape it. I had to face it. The figure stepped closer, its breath cold against my face. It felt like everything in the house was closing in around me. I was suffocating, drowning in the weight of my fear. And then, I did something I never thought I would. I stepped forward. I didn't speak. I didn't even move my lips. I just stepped forward and allowed the darkness to swallow me whole. And as it did, I heard the final knock. Thump, thump, thump. I answered.